Hello, guys. Today's episode is one of the most fascinating stories I've ever heard. This is not something I read in the newspaper, this is not something I watched on television. This is a story of someone I actually encountered, and it's just mind blowing. This episode is testimonial in nature, but spoiler alert, is gonna be a horror movie for the most part, with some way, somehow a happy ending, depending on how you interpret it. Before I go into the story, I want to sound this alarm. If you are somebody whose heart cannot take some of these heavy things I'm gonna talk about, because some of the things I'm gonna talk about are very brutal, they are horrific, then maybe this episode is not for you. So this episode is totally based on a testimony a man I had the privilege of meeting about a month ago told me. His name is Mr. Kamal, and Mr. Kamal was born in Iraq, and he is a Kurd. Back in the days, there used to be a country called Kurdistan, but that country exists no more. So he's basically a descendant of the country that used to be called Kurdistan, but he was born in what we now call Iraq. The reason why he's living in Iraq is because the territory of what used to be Kurdistan is now parts of Turkey, parts of Syria, parts of Iraq, and parts of Iran. So the nation Kurdistan is splitted across these four countries that I mentioned. So you can imagine a part of your own territory being added to a whole new nation. So as a result, these Kurds, wherever they are, whether they are in Turkey, whether they are in Syria, Iraq, Iran, are basically second-class citizens because they don't really see themselves as nationals of those countries. Life for them, generally speaking, is not so easy, which means that they are marginalized in a way and some of their fundamental rights are being violated. So that is just a background. Coming on the story, Mr. Kamal was born in 1984. He was born in Iraq, as I said, and he was born in the middle of war. For those of you that are accustomed to history of international politics, you know that from 1980 to 1988, there was a war between Iraq and Iran, right? And after that, there was the Gulf War and so on and so forth. So throughout his life, he has lived in series and series of wars, from one war to the other. And so before he even started narrating his story to me, I was like, I already know these things because in school, I learned about all these things so I could accurately mention the dates of when this war started, who started it, who formed a coalition to fight, which governments, this and that, and so on and so forth. As he narrated the story, I quickly came to understand that what I actually know about those wars is nothing compared to what actually happened or the reality on the ground, because mostly when it's being taught in school, and this is not a criticism or something, but it's we mostly look at it from an abstract level. We don't really look at things from what is happening on the ground, the day-to-day lives of the citizens, what they go through, how they are coping with it, and so on and so forth. Is mostly what President A is doing, what President B is doing, what the leaders are doing, the decisions they are making, the coalitions they are bringing together, who is negotiating with who, and this and that. But the lives of the civilians on a daily basis, the civilians that are losing their lives in the 10,000s and millions, those are only relegated to statistics. When he narrated the story, it was an eye-opener because we have been so accustomed to war and conflict that anytime you hear about conflict, this war, that it has become so normal. And so we tend to look over it. We don't really take time to give attention, especially to the civilians who are caught in the middle of this war. Yeah, so I'm going to narrate the story as Mr. Kamal told me. So he was born in 1984 in the middle of war. And throughout the entirety of his childhood, he lived in war. He has seen bombs flying left, right, center, missiles being dropped even meters away from him. He himself surviving multiple explosions, seeing people die for fun, losing loved ones, friends, and family due to the bombs and explosions that he was exposed to. He is partially deaf in the right side of his ear, and part of the right side of his face is also paralyzed. This is the kind of childhood that he lived. Because if you look at the whole thing, it wasn't just his childhood. He has been exposed to war for a very huge part of his life. The crazy thing is that because of that, he never had the opportunity to go to school. And he only started learning ABCD at the age of 30. I was so shocked. I was like, what? ABCD at the age of 30. Me sitting here, I'm 25 right now. I can't even imagine that up until this point in my life, I would not have been exposed to any form of education. And it would only be in 5 years' time that I will get to learn ABCD. And these are some of the stories that really gets me thinking. And that is why personally I'm really strict on everything that has to do with education. Because when did I learn ABCD? I learned ABCD probably at the age of 1.5. Somebody only started learning this at the age of 30. And, oftentimes we take these things for granted. The privilege to go to school, the chance to go to school, and we complain and nag and school is this, school is that. He was telling me how he has always wanted to go to school, and he only had the opportunity at the age of 30. It gets even worse. As if this was not bad enough, he also lived under the occupation of ISIS from 2014. This regime was brutal. The level of abuse, the wickedness, the torture that they were subjected to. Unfortunately for him, one of the major cities that ISIS captured in Iraq was the city in which he was living. When ISIS occupied their city, the government ran away. The military that was supposed to protect the citizens, they too ran away. So it was just ISIS with the citizens. And he was describing some of the most crazy things they were subjected to. And again, this is going to be extremely graphic. So if your heart cannot take some of these things, I'm just sounding the alarm bells. I was telling him, I've watched plenty movies about people being under brutal regimes and the kind of things that they are subjected to. And he was like, this is even worse than what you see in the movies. And again, as he continued to narrate the story, I begin to understand that our imaginations, based on the things we have heard, things we have seen in movies of living under a terrorist regime, living under ISIS, for example, those imaginations are nothing compared to the realities on the ground. There is a huge gap between our abilities to imagine the things these people are going through and the actual reality on the ground. And as he continued to narrate the story, I was extremely humbled. He was telling me how people were being abused, the public executions of people, the fact that people will be pushed from buildings to just fall down and die. These executions were public. So when people are being executed, it's not something they did behind the scenes. It was something that they did in public. As a matter of fact, it was mandatory for you to be there to witness the public execution of people that they saw as, dissidents. And he was telling me that how even wearing a jeans can make you a candidate for torture. Because to ISIS, a jeans is you trying to bring in Western influence into the city or to the country. He was telling me how people's hands were being cut off, and all these things happened in public. And it's mandatory for you to be there to witness. As a matter of fact, woe unto you if the public is being called to come and witness different forms of executions and you are not there. And he even told me instances where people are being locked up in cages and they will be carried with an helicopter up in the sky, and then they will be dropped in a river. And I was like, wow. And these are things that he saw with his eyes. He said sometimes they will just lock human beings in cages, and then they will drop them in a swimming pool and just watch how they drown and suffocate and die. And I was like, you witnessed all these things. How do you sleep at night? I was just shocked. The more I listened to him, the more I realized that some of us, we are really privileged, especially those of us in this part of the world. We are so privileged because I feel like for the kind of life we have, we complain too much compared to the kind of life that others have. Me and my fellow Gen Zers, we are very quick to label certain things we go through, certain experiences we go through as trauma. And I'm not here to downplay any experience or any hard or tough experience that anyone has gone through. But some of the things we complain about, if we are putting it into perspective, is really nothing compared to what some of these people have gone through. As he described all of these things, I was just asking myself, what at all will make a human being do such a thing to a fellow human being? I was like, wow. And in psychology, they've tried to explain why human beings, normal human beings, can do such things. And they explain it by what they call situationalism. And situationalism, simply put, is the idea that you can be placed in a circumstance, you can be placed in a situation, an environment that compels you to do certain things that in normal circumstances you would never do, because these situations are so powerful that they overshadow or they overpower your sense of what is right and wrong. There is a psychologist called Philip Zimbardo. He's a social psychologist, and he conducted an experiment to highlight this phenomenon. And that experiment is called the Stanford Prison Experiment. If you don't know it, just search it on the internet. And yeah, I know the psychological explanation for this, but I think this level of wickedness goes beyond, psychology and your environment engineering you to do certain things. I believe that this is spiritual. I think these people are just possessed by, demons and evil spirits. I think it's more spiritual than, natural or circumstantial. And like I said, there was some way, somehow happy ending to the story. So eventually he was able to escape this ISIS regime. And even that was not given, because there were people that tried to escape and they were caught, and these people were publicly executed. And of course, this public execution, once again, was to send a message that there is no escape from this. If you try to escape, this is what will happen to you. So being able to escape was actually a miracle. So he was able to escape in the middle of the night with a group of people through the mountain in the northeastern part of Iraq, and then eventually they came to Turkey, where they lived for a couple of years. Flash forward in 2017, they arrived in the Netherlands, and for a couple of years now he has been in Belgium. He is married, he has 3 kids, and he was telling me how he is motivating his kids to study hard. He has a 9-year-old child that he wants to be a lawyer, and he is always pushing him, encouraging him. It was so beautiful to hear all of this. And he is such a humble person, so down to earth. With all that he has gone through, he is so open-minded, optimistic and hopeful, and such an amazing person. I'm just privileged to have met him. I just hope that life only gets better and better and better for him, because to have experienced this, my goodness, there are people that go through what he went through and they lose their way, they lose their minds. To see what he has gone through from childhood, all the things he was exposed to, and be the person he is now. So strong, humble, down to earth, hopeful. It's just amazing. I'm so inspired in so many ways. This was it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.